The heart attack didn't kill me, but the email almost did. I woke up in a white room, beeping machines keeping rhythm with the second chance I hadn't asked for. The nurse said I was lucky. Said I'd coded for 47 seconds before they brought me back. Said most men don't walk away from a blockage like that. I didn't feel lucky. They let me keep my phone. Said it would help with recovery, familiarity, connection. I picked it up with hands still weak from the IV line and tapped open my inbox. Subject: Organizational changes. From Vincent Burke, CEO. Time: 2:13 a.m. I read it 3 times. The language was cold, corporate, automated. Due to recent strategic realignment, your position has been eliminated effective immediately. Please refer to the attached separation agreement. All company access credentials have been deactivated. No greeting, no signature, just a PDF attachment and a bullet-pointed list. Deactivate badge, terminate email, revoke VPN, inform IT. I stared at the screen, waiting for something human to appear. A second email, a call, a mistake. Nothing. After 26 years, I was dismissed while unconscious in a hospital bed. Fired by a man who'd been CEO for less than 4 months. I closed my eyes and let the weight of it settle behind my ribs. Not anger. Not yet. Just an emptiness that matched the IV bag above me. Drip by drip, the silence filled in the rest. The door opened. A nurse checked my vitals and said something about a cardiologist coming by. I nodded. She smiled. Left. I reopened the email, not because I needed to read it again, but because part of me still didn't believe it. This was how it ended? No exit interview. No acknowledgement. Not even a signature block. I tapped the attachment. The document loaded slowly, then filled the screen with legalese and severance figures that didn't add up. I set the phone down. The machines kept beeping. My chest ached, but something else had started to thrum just under the surface. Not grief, not yet. Something colder. I started with Westland Logistics when the company was 5 years old and barely solvent. Back then, we operated out of a converted warehouse with uneven floors and a coffee machine that spat out mud. My title was Operations Analyst, but I was also the guy who took out the trash and rewired the server room after hours. Whatever needed to be done, I did it. No complaints. No shortcuts. 26 years. I'd survived 3 CEOs, 4 systems overhauls, and a near bankruptcy that almost folded the company in 2008. I stayed. Through acquisitions, layoffs, restructures, mergers. I stayed. While others moved on for better titles and bigger paychecks, I kept the trains running on time, literally and figuratively. I built the logistics backbone that scaled our supply chain into 22 countries. Designed the inventory system we still used. The dashboards, the forecasting tools, the integration protocols, not because anyone asked, because it needed to be done. I mentored kids fresh out of college who now sat in corner offices, watched them rise while I kept the foundation solid beneath them. I didn't mind. I wasn't chasing titles. I was building something. Vincent Burke didn't know any of this. He came in loud VC darling, Harvard MBA, 5 o'clock shadow and buzzwords. Disruption, agility, burn rate. Said our systems were dated, our processes bloated. Said he was here to trim the fat. He never asked who built the architecture his consultants now struggled to decipher. He never asked who trained the teams who kept the lights on. Maybe he thought loyalty was weakness. Or maybe he just didn't notice. I never made noise. Never grandstanded in meetings. I let results speak for themselves. But maybe silence had made me invisible. The company's board used to say I was a safe pair of hands. They meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. But safe doesn't get headlines. Safe doesn't get press releases. And in the end, it didn't get a phone call either. I lay in that hospital bed, Thinking about the system I'd built, though, much of it bore my fingerprints. How much they depended on, without even knowing it. They thought they could just cut me out. They were wrong. Vincent Burke didn't shake hands when he was introduced to the senior team. He air-patted from a distance, smiled like a man used to getting what he wanted, and opened with a joke about replacing 2/3 of us with software. Some of the newer VPs laughed. I didn't. 37. Sharp suits. Polished LinkedIn profile. He came from a VC-backed freight tech company that imploded 2 quarters after his exit. Something about valuation mismatches and creative burn reporting. The board called him forward-thinking. I called him expensive. In our first meeting, he used the phrase legacy bloat to describe systems I'd spent 2 decades refining. Told us he was bringing in a solutions architect team to audit operations and streamline workflows. Translation: fire the people who know what they're doing and replace them with consultants who bill $400 an hour to learn on the job. He didn't know my name, referred to me in one meeting as the senior guy in ops. He barely made eye contact when I pushed back on his supply chain optimization proposal, which would have gutted the load-balancing automation we spent 5 years building. I wasn't political, never played the latter games, but I did warn the board before they voted. He's not building for sustainability, I said. He's building for exit headlines. There's a difference. They thanked me for my candor, then brought him in anyway. Vincent spent his first 60 days cutting headcount, reducing on-site tech support, and rewriting job descriptions to increase agility. He converted 2 storage spaces into breakout lounges with glass walls and ping-pong tables, told the warehouse teams they were part of a culture shift. 3 senior managers resigned. 2 more were restructured. Then came the email. He waited until I was in a cardiac unit with 3 IV lines in my arm to remove the one person who could have stopped him. Smart timing. Cowardly, but smart. The morning after the email, my blood pressure spiked. The nurse blamed the meds. I didn't correct her. They kept asking if I felt pain, if I needed anything for the discomfort. I said no. I didn't feel pain. What I felt was colder than that. I stared at the ceiling tiles above my bed and replayed everything. Every late night. Every disaster averted. Every system I patched to keep the business running through storms, protests, pandemics. Every line of code that saved them money. Every process that saved them time. 26 years. Gone with a PDF. No one from HR called. No one from legal. Not even a boilerplate wellness check. I wasn't expecting a banner or a plaque, but a 2-line email while I was recovering from nearly dying? That was a choice. It told me everything I needed to know about Vincent Burke. He wasn't just cutting fat. He was burying threats. Quiet ones. Ones who might have the history and the access to see what he was really doing. What he didn't know was that I'd never handed over everything. Not out of paranoia, out of habit. Redundancy is survival in logistics. There were mirrors to the system. Log files. Backdoors only I knew about. Built for disaster recovery protocols the board had approved in 2011 and long forgotten. They thought I was just some old guard ops guy who wouldn't understand modernization. What they didn't realize was that I didn't need to understand it. I just needed to watch. And now, I had nothing but time. Her name tag said Alana Mendez, RN, 3rd shift, late 20s, calm hands. She was adjusting my IV line when she paused, studying my face like she was trying to place a memory. You're Robert Langley, right? I nodded, unsure. My cousin Ellie Ramirez interned in your department maybe 10 years ago? Dote. That clicked. Eli, quiet kid with sharp instincts, came from a community college program, beat out a dozen MBA candidates in the long run. I pushed for him to get hired full-time. He'd left for a startup in Denver last I heard. Alana smiled. He always said you were the only reason he made it. Said you taught him more in 6 months than his entire undergrad. I gave a small shrug. And that system you built? The inventory routing thing? People still talk about it. Eli called it the Langley layer. Said it saved the company millions in freight overruns. The words settled over me like dust. People still talk about it. It wasn't bitterness I felt. Not quite pride either. It was something in between. A flicker of recognition. I hadn't been just a name on a spreadsheet. I'd left fingerprints on the bones of the company. And if people still remembered the Langley layer, that meant it was still in use. Which meant I sat up straighter. I still had leverage. Vincent Burke liked to talk about transformation, disruption, clean slates. But clean slates don't exist in logistics. There's always something buried under the concrete T-pipes, wires, pressure points. The trick is knowing where they are. I'd spent years designing a system that couldn't be undone by a PowerPoint presentation. It started in 2011, after a ransomware scare brought us to our knees for 3 days. The board wanted fail-safes. Legal wanted audit trails. Finance wanted recovery time guarantees. So I built it. Quietly. Redundantly. Offsite logs updated nightly through encrypted micro-backups. Workflow mirrors running in parallel cloud sandboxes. Access credentials split and stored through compartmentalized admin shells. There were alert protocols routed to personal emails, not company domains, designed to flag high-risk activity. Not just for me, for legal, for internal audit. Most of those contacts had been deactivated over time. But not all. Vincent's team didn't know they existed. Why would they? The documentation wasn't in the onboarding packets. It was in the basement server drives files labeled generically, buried under system dependencies no consultant would recognize. They'd stripped my badge, revoked my laptop, frozen my email. But they hadn't touched the mirrors. They hadn't even found them. I opened a browser on my personal laptop that night and typed in a URL I hadn't needed in years. It loaded. Slowly. But it loaded. Two-factor authentication. A 6-digit code arrived in my backup inbox. I entered it. And there it was. The spine of the company, blinking in slow, steady pulses like a heartbeat. They thought they cut me out. They forgot who wired the nerves. The hospital discharged me on a Thursday. They offered a brochure on cardiac rehab and a follow-up appointment 2 weeks out. I thanked the nurse, nodded at Alana on my way out, and got in a car that felt suddenly foreign to me. Home was quiet. Andrea had left fresh groceries in the fridge and a note on the counter. Don't even think about checking your email today. Rest. Love you. I didn't listen. I opened my laptop and logged into the mirrors. First, I checked the change logs. Then the audit queues. Then the activity timestamps from the last 48 hours. It didn't take long to see it. Scripts running at irregular intervals. Access requests pinging the mainframe from locations that didn't match employee patterns. A new vendor integration with no traceable approval thread. Sloppy. Or deliberate. My phone buzzed. Langley? The voice on the line was strained. Greg Samuels. Mid-level systems admin. Good guy. Quiet. Competent. I just heard. You're gone? Apparently. That's insane. They didn't even announce it. Half the team thinks you're on extended medical leave. You built half of... He cut himself off. Look. Weird stuff's happening. What kind of stuff? Data disappearing. Invoices not matching ledger entries. A routing table overwrote itself yesterday. I submitted a ticket, but it got flagged no action needed. Who's running ops now? Some consulting firm. Blackrise. Haven't seen them before. They're opaque. I made a note. You didn't hear this from me, Greg added. But someone's leaking reports, sensitive stuff, client data, pricing models. Whole folders gone. Who else knows? No one's talking. But people are nervous. I ended the call and stared at the screen for a long time. They'd kicked me out of the building. But they hadn't shut the back door. Years ago, After a vendor fraud scandal made headlines, the board called for increased transparency. They wanted a system to track internal access patterns, something invisible but immutable. I built it over a summer, tucked it into the lowest levels of our infrastructure, beneath the user interface layers, under the API calls. A logging system that documented every system-level change, access request, and data export. It timestamped everything, flagged anomalies, reported nothing directly, just stored it. The board loved the idea. Legal too, for 6 months. Then they got distracted. Priorities shifted. Initiatives piled up. The system was never formally decommissioned. It just drifted into obscurity. But I'd kept it live. Not out of paranoia, out of habit. If the walls ever cracked again, I wanted the blueprints. Tonight, those blueprints saved me. I logged into the audit trail under the legacy dev shell and ran a Delta query. Within seconds, a pattern emerged. A credentials escalation from Vincent's executive assistant. A full export of client analytics routed to an encrypted drive. Multiple off-hours admin logins masked through proxy locations. And most telling, a series of test transfers sent to a new vendor, alias Kensington Data Partners. I traced the IP metadata. It looped through 3 bounce points before landing in a hosting cluster registered to a private holding company in Delaware. No website, no listed employees. But I recognized the domain. It was referenced in one of Vincent's onboarding files. A preferred partner for digital transition services. I kept digging, and what I found made my chest tighten, not from the surgery, but from something else. Vincent wasn't just replacing old systems. He was laundering data through shell firms. And no one was watching. Except me. It started with a line item. 162. 0 billed by Blackrise Consulting for Strategic Systems Integration, Phase 1. Except there was no Phase 1, no documented SOW, no system changes logged in the internal dev pipeline. I would have known I designed the original chain of custody. I cross-referenced billing entries with internal logs. Week by week, the discrepancies piled up. Double charges, duplicate invoice IDs, signatures signed by ghost users. Consultant overbilling was just the surface. I dug deeper. Security bypass logs showed a pattern: access credentials assigned, revoked, then reassigned under alternate aliases. One user, supposedly working remote from Palo Alto, had logged in from Singapore, Prague, and Des Moines within 24 hours. I knew what I was seeing. Masking tactics, credential laundering, digital smokescreens. And behind it all, Kensington Data Partners. A shell, dressed up in clean branding and vague language. Full service analytics. Agile transformation. Except there was no staff list, no client history, no legitimate projects in the pipeline. Only outbound invoices, each routed through Vincent Burke's authorization chain. Then I found it. A minor shareholder filing buried in a quarterly report. Kensington's holding company, cross-linked through a registered trust. Trustee V. Burke Holdings, LLC. It was all there. Vincent wasn't modernizing the company. He was stripping it for parts. Funnel the work through consulting firms he controlled. Inflate the contracts. Bury the paper trail in buzzwords. And the board had no idea. Or worse, some of them did. I didn't call legal. I didn't go to HR. I called someone who'd seen a scandal up close. And survived it. Robert Chen. Board member. Audit committee chair. And, years ago, the only person who listened when I raised red flags during the Horizon vendor breach. He was semi-retired now. Didn't show up to every board meeting. Didn't speak much when he did. But he paid attention. I found his number in an old directory. Called twice. Got voicemail. The third time, he picked up. Chen. Robert Langley. Silence. Then, didn't expect to hear from you. I wouldn't be calling unless it mattered. He didn't ask why. He didn't say he was busy. Talk. I didn't go into detail over the phone. I just said there were discrepancies. Logs. Names. Paper trails. That it wasn't just about bad leadership. It was about fraud. I'm sending you a package, I said. You'll want to read it alone. He paused, then said, use the private address, not the office. I already did. We hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I stayed up assembling the file. Every audit log, every invoice, every fake domain registration, a clean timeline, with notes and diagrams, simple language, no embellishment, just facts. I exported it all onto a secure flash drive and dropped it at a private courier the next morning, addressed to Chen's home in Virginia. Then I sat back at my desk, finger hovering over the keyboard, staring at the files stored on my own hard drive. I didn't send it by email. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about exposing Vincent. This was about leverage. Timing. Precision. If I moved too soon, he'd frame it as a grudge. But if I moved at the right moment, when the board couldn't ignore, I'd fall hard. And this time, someone would be watching. I didn't need credit. I just needed impact. So I drafted a one-page summary, just the facts, no names. A breadcrumb trail of consulting invoices, data irregularities, and access anomalies. Included enough to raise alarms, but not enough to draw a direct line back to me. Then I routed it through a masked relay email I'd set up years ago for internal whistleblower simulations. Subject line: potential financial misconduct. Immediate review recommended. Recipient: internal compliance at westlandlogistics.com. I sent it at 11:58 p.m. By 9:00 a.m., the tremors had already started. Compliance froze all executive access logs for the previous quarter. Digital forensics pulled login credentials from Vincent's executive suite. The board scheduled a closed-door review session routine. They called it, but people noticed. Assistants whispered. Meetings were postponed. 2 consultants from Blackrise were reassigned, mid-project without explanation. By lunch, Vincent hadn't been seen on the floor. His door stayed shut. At 3:42 p.m., my phone rang. No caller ID. I answered. Langley. His voice was sharp, tight. We need to talk. I waited. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this isn't the way to handle it. Silence on my end. Name the place. I did. Somewhere neutral. Quiet. Off-grid. Where no one would interrupt what came next. We met in the back booth of a half-empty diner outside the city. Vincent arrived 10 minutes late, dressed for a boardroom, not a confrontation-pressed blazer, pocket square, and that thin-lipped smile that always tried too hard to be genuine. I'd already set my phone to record. Face down, mic up. He slid into the booth across from me and skipped the pleasantries. I want to know what you're after. I sipped my coffee. He leaned forward. You've made a mistake. These allegations, they're noise. Circumstantial. You're out of your depth. You're nervous, I said quietly. His jaw tightened. You think this is about revenge. It's not. It's about control. You think you had it. Now you don't. Vincent exhaled slowly, recalibrating. Look, Robert. We can fight. Or we can find a solution. You've got history with the company. Respect. Let's use that. He opened a leather folder and slid it across the table. Advisory role. Consultant level compensation. Discretion clause. You get what you want: recognition, financial stability, and we move on. I didn't touch the folder. No apology? I asked. No acknowledgement? He smiled, again rehearsed. Corporate. Let's be adults. You get something out of this. I get stability. Win-win. I let the silence stretch. Let him hear it. Then I stood. You think I want a seat at your table? I asked. I built the table. You're just renting it. He said something else as I walked out. I didn't hear it. Didn't care. The recording was clear. The next move was mine. The emergency session was scheduled for 8:00 a.m. sharp. No press. No outside advisors. Just the 10 board members, 2 compliance officers, and 1 chair reserved for me. I arrived 10 minutes early. Suit pressed. No tie. Folder in hand. They didn't offer coffee. Robert Chen nodded as I entered. The others stayed quiet, evaluating, uncertain. They didn't know yet whether I was a liability or a savior. I didn't waste time. I laid the folder on the table and distributed its contents. Transaction trails, access logs, DNS records, forensic snapshots, and a transcript of Vincent's thinly veiled bribe. Then I plugged in a drive and loaded a live dashboard dome they hadn't seen before. One I'd built years ago for internal risk modeling. I'd reactivated it overnight. Every flagged transaction blinked in red. Kensington Data Partners, Blackrise Consulting, the holding company trail. Each arrow pointed to Vincent Burke. You wanted transparency, I said, voice steady. This is what it looks like. One director cleared his throat. Why now? I looked him in the eye. Because I was fired while recovering from a cardiac event. Because you trusted a man who built nothing, understood nothing, and used your silence as cover. Because someone had to stop the damage before it became criminal negligence. Then, without breaking eye contact, I opened my laptop and entered a command string. The screen blinked once, twice. Company-wide audit freeze initiated. No files could be altered, no logs deleted, no systems purged, or permissions revoked. Fail-safe protocol, I explained. Built it during the Horizon scare. Never dismantled. Triggered from any terminal I authenticate. A different kind of silence followed. This time, they understood. I hadn't just exposed Vincent. I'd protected the company from him. Again, by 5:00 p.m., Vincent Burke had been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending investigation. The official email read. Unofficially, he was already gone. The next morning, I was invited back not as an employee, but as a guest of the board. They called it a discussion. I called it a negotiation. The interim CEO, a finance VP with tired eyes, greeted me in the executive conference room. Chen spoke first. You've done more than anyone else to safeguard this company. The board recognizes that. And we believe it's time we gave you the authority to make sure it never happens again. He slid a document across the table. Chief Ethics, Systems Officer, Executive Level, Direct Report to the Board, Full Operational Independence. I skimmed it, then added my own folder on top. Inside were 3 pages, one outlining my conditions, one detailing a phased oversight integration plan, and one a printout of the severance PDF Vincent had emailed to my hospital bed. Full autonomy, I said. Independent budget. Real-time audit visibility across all departments. My pension reinstated retroactively, and a written public acknowledgement of wrongful termination. The interim CEO shifted in her seat. That's unusual. So was embezzling your way through $4.7 million in shell contracts. She said nothing. Chen looked at the others. We'll review and respond by noon, I said. Silence. Then he nodded. At 11:48, they called. Every condition accepted. 6 months later, my office sits on the top floor. Corner window. Frosted glass door. Nameplate reads, Chief Ethics, Systems Officer. No one knocks anymore. They ask to come in. The systems are stable. The audit's clean. The shadows that once lived between vendor codes and invoice trails have been cleared out, documented, rebuilt. Not with firewalls and buzzwords, but with process, accountability, and people who care enough to do things right the first time. Greg now runs internal infrastructure. Smart. Careful. I trust him. We've onboarded 5 new analysts known with MBAs, but all with questions. The right kind. I sit with them weekly. Not in meetings. In motion. Walking through diagrams, reviewing scripts, drawing maps on whiteboards no one thought to use before. There's a quiet rhythm to it now. No press releases. No headlines. Just structure, integrity, momentum. And in the margins, I get calls from other departments, legal, procurement, even marketing asking how we implemented the failsafe, how we caught the blind spots. No one's trying to bury me anymore. They're listening. I leave each day around 6:00. Not because I have to, but because I can. At night, Andrea and I walk the neighborhood like we used to. Sometimes she asks if I miss the chaos. I tell her no. But I do miss the quiet part of the fight, the planning. The precision. The slow restoration of order after someone tried to dismantle it for profit. And I think about all the systems I built over the years that no one saw. The redundancies. The backups. The traps. The lifelines. The pieces designed not for credit, but for continuity. At the end of it all, I don't need a statue or a tribute or a framed thank you. Because I know what I did. And so do they. Voiceover. If this were a movie, would fade in about here. Sometimes the strongest structures are the ones you build when no one is watching. Quiet foundations. Invisible frameworks. Systems designed not for applause, but for survival. Let the loud ones chase titles. Let the flashy ones burn bright. I'll be here, making sure the lights stay on when the power goes out. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.